boom indeed. Yes, boom indeed. I want to talk about objectification and sexualisation in video games, and I wanted to better do it in a little bit more of a free-form environment so I could just talk about it. I have some notes to keep me vaguely on track, but I didn't want to make this too formal a video, and I want to talk about what I see as a kind of, is it a double standard? It's more of a heads you win, tails you lose scenario with regards to the claim that women are sexualised in video games and men are not. Which seems to be almost however, what my claim is, almost however you portrayed men in video games. There is no way that you will ever satisfy the criteria to say that they are sexualized in video games in a way which is comparable to the terrible, awful, obnoxious, abhorrent way that women are sexualized in video games. And what had triggered this was a video that I watched by a YouTuber called Liana K, who makes videos almost exclusively about video games. Very talky videos. It's perhaps enlightening that I watch her videos in that maybe some of the flaws that I have, which is waffling on too much, especially at the beginning of videos, and talking about things that are only tangentially related, are some of her failings. And she might make a 30-minute video that could have been 15 minutes, or a 15-minute video that could have been 7.5 minutes, and I kind of do the same. So if you like that kind of thing, we're probably sort of kindred spirits in that regard, or we share the same failings, however you may see it. But she made a video looking at Dead or Alive 6. And of course, the game Dead or Alive 6 has come out, and the first reviews have come out, and there's been some criticism. Some of the reviews have spent a lot of time talking about the breasts of the female competitors or the sexualizing outfits. And so what she did in her video was she looked through the standard outfits for the male fighters and the female fighters, and compared and gave her opinion on how sexualized they were. And that was kind of interesting. I didn't agree. I felt she was reaching a little bit more with some of them, especially when she was looking at their facial expressions. But then that is the nature, I suppose, of evaluating how sexualized something is, in that it is very much in the eye of the beholder. But I thought that largely I agreed with the point she was making, and that was what I wanted to respond to with regard to this. I should just frame it into some kind of context, because we are living within a seriously perverse society here, which is that some of these video games reviewers were reviewing Dead or Alive 6 and complaining about the sexualization or the sexy outfits of some of the female characters, which is something that the series is renowned for. Let's not get away from that. And also the jiggle physics, the breasts move, which as you will well know if you watch my video on this particular subject, I have no problem with jiggle physics. Actually, I think it's a good thing, because it makes the characters look significantly more realistic when it's done right. And that was the concern that I had there, that effectively done right, realistic breasts compared to, for a lot of people, are breasts that hardly move, where nothing could be further from the truth. If you have large breasts and you perform a series of fucking spins in the air, your breasts go every way that's known to mankind. The problem that I do have with Dead or Alive 6 is that the breasts are not. It's kind of like they're not sitting on anything. They're not sitting in the cup of a bra if they're in a bra, and they don't sort of hit into the cup of a bra and supported by it. They are like a couple of weights on the end of a spring, really. And that isn't how breasts move. So there is some legitimacy to that. But she was talking about that. And to frame it in some kind of context, these same reviewers who will be criticising Dead or Alive 6 for having this mild sexual context and having a woman dressed up in a bikini, in a few weeks they will be reviewing Mortal Kombat 11, a game where the developers sit round a fucking table and say to themselves, what is the most gruesome acts of non-sexual violence that you can imagine, and what's the most gruesome way that we can show them on camera to make the most gory, violent game that we can possibly make. And the same reviewers will be waxing lyrical about that fucking game. And it's really kind of weird to me that you can show people having their intestines ripped out and rammed down their fucking throats, and it'll get a round of thumbs up. And yet that is That was to be function as part of our society. If we were to respond to that in any way in which it increased the likelihood of non-sexual violence to anything even 100th of that scale, it would be a terrible societal evil. And yet for them, the societal evil is looking at a female character in a bikini. That to me is a perversion. That is an obscenity that we have that kind of disparity in viewing things. That's an aside. But it got me thinking yet again about the whole business of objectification and claims of objectification. And it's bollocks, quite honestly. What people tend to say is something along the lines of, and it's a kind of virtue signalling, but it's not necessarily a virtue signalling to those people on the left who you'd often regard as people virtue signaling to. It's actually virtue signaling to the rest of us, because you can virtue signal to anybody and they'll say, it's not the sexualization I mind, right? I don't mind nothing against sexualization. It's the objectification. Women are being objectified here, right? And in the context of video games, honestly, I cannot imagine a bigger load of bollocks, because it is not the objectification that they're bothered about, it's the sexualization. If they objected to the objectification, that's a mouthful, but if they objected to the objectification, then they'd be objecting way before any sexualization appeared on the scene. Because if there's one thing that video games do, it is objectify. They don't treat people as subjects. They don't treat people as fully fleshed out people. They treat people as objects to be manipulated, to be reduced to statistics, to pawns that we move around the board without giving it a second thought. You play a sport game like FIFA, right? Not only are you trading people for money, and you ain't concerned about their wealth, how much they are worth, how much value they're worth, not as a person, not as a human being, but as a footballing currency, but you evaluate them purely on a series of statistics, their passing ability, their shooting ability, their defensive ability, and then you manipulate them around on this digital pitch. You've no interest in them. They are just mechanisms. They are just tools, objects for you to perambulate a ball to the opponent's goal and stop the opponent perambulating a ball to your goal. Those players could be stark bollock fucking naked and there would not be one shred more objectification than there is already, because they are already being maximally objectified. All there would be an additional sexual element. So if you suddenly found an objection, it would be an objection at the sexualization, not at objectification, because seemingly you don't give a fuck about objectification unless there is sexualization going with it. Think about a game where you control a little military squad, or an RPG like Warcraft or something like that, Baldur's Gate. You create your little group, and what you think is, I want somebody, effectively what you think is, I want rocket launchers. I want a rocket launcher, right? So you pick somebody who has a rocket launcher. You're not treating them as a person. You are treating them effectively as a mobile rocket launcher. You're playing an RPG and you want a tank. You want a mage to shoot fireballs or a priest to heal. You're dealing with them as if they are an object that can heal, an object that can do damage, or an object that can protect you from damage. And that is as much thought as you give. And there is probably no genre of games in some ways that is more objectifying just at its face value as fighting games. And the reason that I say that is because in fighting games we actually do have a chance. They're a more fleshed out character. We can see their faces, we can see their expressions, we can see the actual blows that are raining in on their body. And yet nobody picks a fighter with that in mind. Nobody scrolls across to Chun-Li and sees that their opponent has picked Ryu and thinks, well, would Chun-Li want to fight Ryu in this circumstance? How would Chun-Li think about this? How would Chun-Li feel about this? Or thinks, well, would Ryu be happy fighting Chun-Li in this circumstance? No, all they think is, I want to perform a fucking spinning bird kick, right? I want to smash this. I want to smash my opponent's avatar in the face with my avatar. This individual you are using, this character you are using, is effectively just a means of dishing out damage to the opponent's character. And that is all it is, alongside something that looks nice along the way. There is no way of really objectifying beyond that. You can sexualize beyond that. Of course you can. You can dress Chun-Li up in a couple of fucking nipple pasties with little tassels coming off. You can sexualize Chun-Li more, but you cannot objectify more, because already you are viewing that character entirely as an object to dish out damage and no more. You have no concern over that individual as a person, as a subject, even given the fact, of course, that they're just a digital avatar, they don't just exist, but you never pick characters based upon their interactions with other characters or how they feel about them. You just pick them on account of what they can actually do. So this is the problem that I have, is that people really, they talk about, they're hiding behind this business of objectification, when really what they are concerned about is sexualization. Always sexualization of women. Couldn't give a fuck about sexualization of men. It's sexualization of women, women's bodies, blah, blah, blah. That is actually what they're concerned about. But they don't actually want to say that, because that sounds crap. They sound a bit conservative, a bit regressive, and it provides a form of dissonance for them, because at the same time they hold these somewhat slightly hypocritical perspective that women can wear whatever they want, show whatever flesh they want to show, and that's absolutely fine. It's a woman's right to do it. It's just that nobody should be looking at it, right? She wants to show her tits off, but nobody should be looking at them. That's right. I mean, it just doesn't make any fucking sense. It's like me saying, I'm going to juggle with 5 fucking balls here, but nobody better look. I'm going to walk into this room with my bollocks hanging out, right? But nobody better look at my bollocks, right? It just doesn't make any sense as far as I'm concerned. But the bit that I particularly thought about when listening to Liana's video was on how an impossible situation is set up, which is, it runs something like this. The claim is, you'll read it on a forum or a review, no problem with sexualization, even sexual objectification, if the male characters were objectified in the same way. The problem is, it is actually impossible to objectify the male characters in the same way, because if you do it in the same way, society doesn't deem it as male characters being sexualized. This is the problem. You only have to go out on a Saturday night to see the disconnect here. On a Saturday night, younger people in their late teens, early 20s, early 30s, go out trying to look their best in a way that they will look sexy to the opposite sex. And you will note that almost every single fucking person you see, assuming they're not very much out of shape, that the guys that you will see will be wearing far more clothing than the women. A woman might go out in a short skirt, in a pair of hot pants, with her chest partially exposed in one region or another, with her arms out, maybe with her back exposed. That is regarded as sexy. That will garner her compliments from the opposite sex. She will be seen as sexually attractive from the opposite sex, and garner her compliments from actually people of the same sex. Even people of the same sex who are not sexually attracted to her will think, wow, she looks good. I wish I looked that good in a dress, or I wish I had that dress because I'd look that good, etc., etc. If a guy went out wearing the same amount of clothing as that woman, not only would he be mocked by his friends, but I propose to you he'd be mocked by most women. They wouldn't go, "Whoa, he looks hot in that pair of hot pants, or with his whole chest exposed so I can nearly see his nipples," right? They'd go, "Look at that fucking idiot over here. He fancies himself, doesn't he?" The truth is that what men see as sexy in women almost always involves showing more flesh than what women of their own volition see as sexy in men. When my wife was playing Street Fighter V with me on my arcade cabinet, when she saw Urian for the first time in his standard clothing, which is a jacket with a sort of lilac purple shirt that is sort of unbuttoned a bit, showing a little bit of chest, but he's in a suit. A very smart suit. He looks the business. She said, "Wow, he looks sexy. She had the same visceral response that I had when I saw Laura Matsuda with her tits spilling out. And this is the problem. This is the double standard, is that that's not good enough. That doesn't satisfy the sexual objectification to say that, well, the men are being sexualized in the same way as women. Look, there's a sexy woman, right, with her tits half spilling out and a short skirt on. There's a sexy man in a sharp suit. They say, no, that's not the same because he's not showing as much flesh. But if he shows as much flesh, they'll say, well, that's not the same because that's not sexy. He's not looking sexy. She looks sexy. He doesn't look sexy. What they want is a situation where the male characters show as much flesh and look as much sexy, knowing that when the male characters show as much flesh, they don't look as sexy. They're demanding something that you can never fulfill. And that's the problem with this here. So effectively you contrive a situation where male characters can be sexualized because it doesn't involve wearing as few clothing for the purposes of it could be for the purposes of titillating female consumers, but it's kind of wrong when you do it for male consumers because more flesh is on show. The same thing, I've heard the same thing said with regard to the way the characters act. This is something that Anita Sarkeesian trotted out in the pack with butts. She made a video all about female butts. The problem is that what is regarded as a sexy pose or a sexy posture or a sexy way of moving for a male character is not the same as a female character. So saying, well, I don't mind a female character sticking her bottom out and wiggling it at the camera. I've no problem with that if the male characters were doing the same thing. The problem is if a male character did it, nobody other than a small percentage of gay men would, and I don't just mean gay men are a small percentage, I mean a small percentage of gay men would regard that as sexy. They'd think, what the fuck's he doing? That's not a sexy thing for a man to do. That isn't something that we typically in our society regard as a sexy thing for a man to do. So we would all laugh about it. And then the person who has demanded, well, it's okay as long as the male characters do the same thing, would say, well, that doesn't count because it wasn't sexy. It just looked ridiculous. So effectively you have a situation here where you can't win. And that's a kind of interesting scenario that... If it's a shame that this isn't more acknowledged, because I think that if it was more acknowledged, it wouldn't be so easy for people to make these half arguments, and say, well, if you did this, it would be okay. If you did that, it would be okay. But when you fit them all together, they don't fit together in any shape or form. Okay, I think that's it. I'm leaving it at that. I don't know if there's any particular conclusion to draw from that.